So we are just about at 7:05. We have the recording going. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our May Evening Education Connection. We're thrilled to have Tom and Becky here. Tom Quinn, our current HMS president, and Becky Bradbeer, our HMS board chair. And tonight's presentation is all about the HMS board. So I am excited to hand things over to Tom and Becky. Teresa and I will be available to monitor the chat for any questions throughout. And here we go.
Great. Hi, everybody. Good evening. As you heard, I'm Tom Quinn. I'm the president of HMS. Becky, would you like to say hello?
Hi, everyone. I'm Becky Bradbeer. It's really great to be with you tonight to share a little bit about what a board is, and specifically what the HMS board is. Back to you.
Got it. Great. Well, I want to thank Teresa and Julia. They put together a PowerPoint for us that I'm going to take you through if I can properly share my screen. So bear with me on that. I'll take you through that. And then, like Becky said, basically the purpose is to talk about two things, really: what a nonprofit board is, and also specifically how the HMS nonprofit board works. And then we're going to, it won't take too long to go through the presentation part of things. And then we'll open it up for any questions that anybody has, either about the presentation or about just the board in general. So I'm going to share my screen now. Very pleased with myself when it effectively goes through.
There we go.
All right, everybody sees that all right? Okay. It's great. So like I said, all about the HMS board, as Julie was saying. And so let me take you through this. Oop, I went too far. Already messed up. Okay. So the agenda for what we're going to talk about is obviously Becky's already said hello, but we'll hear a little bit more from her in just a second. And then we're also going to share with you information from our website about the full makeup of our board, of who everybody is who's there. We really are very fortunate in the volunteers who have been part of our board, some for many years. So get a chance to get an idea of who everybody is. And then, like I said, just take a couple of minutes just talking about what a nonprofit board is. It is a little bit unusual, the way we work, and the specific kind of organization that HMS is. And then we'll talk about what our board does. And like I said, then Becky will be available, and I'll be here too for any questions that anybody has. All right. So here's Becky. So Becky, we're really lucky, is currently our longest serving board member. I hope I'm not aging you too much by saying that, Becky.
Wow.
And so give you an idea of, again, really, Becky's been hugely helpful to me in having the background and experience that she has and how long she's been involved in the board. And so she really was here for the last major board initiative, which was the 2007 capital campaign, which was the renovation that gave us the residence. And so, HMS, with our age, obviously has gone through several different versions from a construction standpoint, but the most recent one was in 2007, and Becky was part of that. She's also incredibly active in the community. I have yet to go. I don't think in the last several years I've gone to a Philadelphia theater production without running into Becky, including Saturday night. She's very involved in the community. As a board member currently with Outreach and Citizen Advocacy of Chester County. And you have another board, don't you, Becky, that you're part of?
I am also on the board of the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville. So my interests span both accessibility, advocacy, and culture. And the arts. So I have a pretty, hopefully, broad scope of interests that I'm involved with.
It's great. I won't ask you to do any sort of show off of that brand new chair that you have, though, although it is really cool what you've got.
Don't twist my arm.
maybe in the Q&A section, people can ask about that. So look at everybody else. So again, just give you a sense of really all of the wonderful people that we have on the board. The goal of the board is to really get a wide variety of experience. HMS is a board of trustees, and so what that means is the primary job of our board is fiduciary, which means it's about the money and making sure that people like myself and Jeff Schaefer, our VP of Finance, are properly managing the funds that come into HMS. HMS is about a $12 million organization. So having people who have financial experience to advise us in making sure that we're both using the money correctly and growing it correctly for the future, that's a huge part of what the board does. So just really quickly looking at some of our board members, Tom Hipp is our most recent past board chair. And that's Tom's background is he's in the world of finance. And so he has come and given us that perspective in helping to manage our endowment, which is the fund that we use really like a rainy day fund. And we're really fortunate to have a significant endowment that really is something that protects HMS for the long term for our future. And that's a big part of what the board's looking at is how can HMS sustain itself to not just accomplish the mission today, but the mission well into the future. And so Tom's background is part of that. Tom's been on the board for many years. He's active in his community. He was a very engaged board chair. He came on not long after I came on as president. Tom was physically in the building quite a lot, really interested in the renovation studies that we're doing, the sidewalks that are just in the process of being fixed. If you haven't seen the building, we have wonderful smooth sidewalks on 43rd Street. Half of the building has been done. Tom was really instrumental in finding a contractor who could do that work and has been here many days, sort of kind of seeing the advancement of that work. Skip Corcoran is next. He's currently our treasurer. He is still our treasurer of our board. And Skip also has a strong financial background. So our board goes through a process where all of our finances are audited every year, very specifically. That's part of several laws that do govern 501c3s, which is what we are, that we do an outside independent audit of our finances. And Skip is really instrumental in that process. And again, that's somebody else who comes in and again, looks at all of our books to make sure that the money is being handled properly. So Skip's background in finance is really helpful in that. And Skip's been involved in the board for many years and has been instrumental in HMS has seen a significant growth in its endowment over the last 10 years. And it really directly ties in to when Skip's been on the board. So he's been a tremendous help to us. Nora Vizicero is our secretary currently of our board. And again, this gives you a sense of what we look for in the board is that Nora's background is in the world of medicine. You can see there that she's a nurse with Cooper University. And so she has pediatric nurse experience working with children with neurological and developmental disorders. So that's, again, part of the expertise that we're looking for in a board is she gives us that background in her professional life to kind of come in and basically be almost like an advisor to us, but we'll talk specifically about how the board actually works with that as we look at everybody else. Steve Bacharach is a tremendous asset for us. Steve has had a beautiful relationship with HMS. For almost 30 years, he was the medical director here at HMS until his retirement. And Steve has literally, you hear the expression written the book, Steve has written the book when it comes to CP. He was involved at Nemours for many, many years in starting the clinic down there. And Steve has published the most recent version of it is a 3-volume work about children with cerebral palsy. So his background and expertise and having him as one of our lead advisors is incredibly important. He's always asking questions from that medical standpoint, from his experience that he brings from having been involved for so long. Tom Drake is also another person with really tremendous medical background and currently a practicing physician, and kind of comes in and gives us that background as a current clinician and has been involved for several years, and also has a really, as a former educator, has a really strong interest in the kids and who they are, and he's been a wonderful part of the board as well. Jerry Kitzhofer is on there. Really very fortunate to have Jerry. Jerry is the former executive director of Overbrook School for the Blind. So he's run an organization, even larger than HMS, with a similar sort of construction that is governed by a 501c3 nonprofit board, as well as a large staff working with students with a very specific need. Jerry has been personally wonderful for me, really advising and being a mentor to me when I came on board. And so he's been a wonderful asset on the board and still remains active. We have another board member who's on the call. I don't know if she wants to say anything, or else if she just wants to be a spectator, that's totally okay. But Marilyn Long is on the call right now. Marilyn, you want to stay quiet or you want to say anything? Okay, I'll get going. Marilyn, who I want to also congratulate everybody, just recently retired, but also brings a business background that's really helpful from a board perspective. And she currently chairs our audit committee, which is that's the part of the board that actually does bring an outside auditor and make sure our finances are where they're supposed to be. That usually happens during the month of August, where the auditors come in and really just look at our books and make sure that everything is in place. And that's something that, again, is part of the law governing nonprofits that happen. But it's a really important part of what we do, again, to make sure that all of the funds that we have are being managed properly. But probably Marilyn's greatest contribution to us is that her daughter Amanda was a resident. And so she brings that perspective of a parent that has been really something that has been a pretty important part of our board, to make sure there's usually former parent representation on the board, to give that perspective, to always have the mission of HMS first and foremost. That's one of the things that was really remarkable to me in my first board meetings, was understanding everyone on the board is devoted to the mission of HMS. Their job is to manage the finances, but conversations that we have are often about making sure that the mission is first before anything else. And that's really something I've worked with a number of nonprofit boards in different areas. We're really lucky that we have board members who are so focused on keeping the mission of HMS at the forefront. Charlie Pilkington, the next person is there, can give you an idea of the kind of balance that we look for on the board. Charlie has terrific experience managing buildings. And so Charlie is the one that we go to when a lot of the physical plant challenges. We are a 140-year-old building. So there are a lot of physical plant challenges, and having Charlie on the board is somebody who connects us to people who can fix things, which things are always breaking. And Charlie has a lot of contacts in the city. And also Charlie can really, with his professional experience, kind of look at some of the proposals that we get that come in from people, because again, fixing our building is very expensive. So having Charlie on the board, being able to advise us on the right sort of choices we make to make sure that we're properly using our resources from the physical standpoint, plant standpoint, is really great. Our most recent board member is Christine Wexler. Christine is an attorney. That's also something that was missing from the board, is that there are a lot of legal issues that come up. Working with school districts, working with the funding that we get, just having a large building, having a lot of employees. And Christine brings a legal background. She actually has worked both in the public sector. She worked for Governor Corbett for a while. And also she's worked, knows quite a bit about working with Department of Health and Human Services, DHS, that is in charge of our residents. And so she's very, very much has a background in the law that we were kind of missing from a board perspective. And she's our most recent a member of the board, and she's actually currently the vice chair of the board. And so she's a really wonderful addition to the board that's coming our way. All right, so I mentioned a couple words. I'm going to go through the rest of the content part of this, and I'll stop and be open for any questions anybody has. So I'm using the word 501c3 quite a lot, and that basically is simply it's a tax designation that was created, and that means basically that we don't pay any income tax. So it's a business tax classification that basically says, as a nonprofit board, what that means is we basically the board is designed, like I said, to be a fiduciary board. And so what that means is they really are, the most important thing they do is to make sure that finances are being managed appropriately. Now, HMS is one of 32 approved private schools, which can be kind of a confusing designation when we talk to people about it. Because we're not, as I'm sure most of you know, we're not really a private school. We are largely about 95% publicly funded. But the question is, where does that money come from? About 40% of it comes from the state of Pennsylvania. That's the 32 approved private schools that we're part of. Roughly about 50 to 55% of it comes from individual school districts. We work with 27 different school districts for the 62 students who are currently students at HMS. And roughly about 5% is money that is raised. So what the 501c3 status allows you to do is to do that. It lets you take charitable contributions, but there are very specific rules and laws around that. One of them is that you have to have a board of trustees that's overseeing you and making sure that the people that the board employs, and the board really only hires one person directly, and that's me. So the board directly hires the president, but they also are greatly involved in hiring the financial person of the board. They were involved in hiring Jeff Schaefer as part of that because we're the two people who most frequently interact with the board. So the board technically is my boss, and the 501c3 status means they're basically making sure that Jeff and I and everybody who works at HMS are managing all of the money that we have. Again, it comes to about this year's budget is going to be about $12 million. So that's a lot. And there's a lot of things that the board wants to make sure that Jeff and I are doing, that we're using that money responsibly. And so it's a little bit different. And sometimes this confusion has come up. So that's why I wanted to do that tonight. And I really appreciate Julie and Teresa for putting this together. Is what's different between a board like ours and a public school board that you might be used to in your communities. So there's a lot of differences to that. And sometimes using the word board can be a little bit confusing because they are so different. So when it comes to a nonprofit board, where do these board members come from? So the board does recruitment. There is a recruitment process that exists in our board. And I kind of tried to give you a quick overview of that. Is what our board does is they look at what do we have? Who do we have who's an expert? We look for people who have a medical background. We just add somebody who has a legal background. We look for somebody who has an education background, a physical plant background, and we also want to make sure of two things: that having a former parent on our board has been really important in HMS for about the last 15 years, and also having somebody who has some connection to CP. All of our board members, for the most part, have something personally that kind of connects them to the mission. That's why it was really wonderful for me when I was hired 5 years ago and my interactions with the board. It's just a beautiful thing to hear how much our board is talking about the mission. Their job is the finances. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about, if we do this, will the mission still be in good shape? Those are the questions that often come our way. So the recruitment is looking at how do you balance that board out with people to make sure we've got the right balance of experience. With a public school, obviously that's where we get into politics, which thankfully we mostly can avoid at HMS. Those are all elected positions. And I'm sure you know your communities how interesting that can get. And so the meetings are different too. Most nonprofit boards meet quarterly. We meet 4 times a year, but we also will meet if there's any sort of emergency situations that come up, any kind of changes in staffing or changes in status. Certainly during COVID, there were several meetings that were called that were not scheduled to talk about some things. And we do meet currently in a hybrid format. We've kind of went to that during COVID, and so that's something that we've kept up with, is that we'll do in-person meetings and sort of a split screen. I'll be talking to the people who are there and also talking to a screen like this. And our meetings are not public like they are in a school board. We do take minutes of those things. We do share the results of those things with people, but it's not an open forum like it is for a public school meeting. Again, really important to understand when it comes to the programming standpoint of a nonprofit board versus a public school board. Our board does not get into the day-to-day operation of HMS. That's not what they do. Their purpose is the long-range view of HMS, to make sure that the HMS that we have today is around 20 years, 30 years, in our case, 50 years, 100 years from now. Their job is to look and make sure that they're managing the long-term prospects of HMS. Doesn't mean that they don't care about the current programs and that they talk about that. I spend a lot of time in meetings making sure our board is aware of what our programs are about. But our board members are not coming in and deciding what kind of curriculum we have, what kind of care we have for our students, the way therapies are applied, and they're not involved in staffing in that particular way either. They hire myself and our VP of Finance to oversee those things, whereas a public school board can be more involved in that. They will talk about policy. They will set things like that. They do approve all official hires, and sometimes, unfortunately, we're in a day and age where public schools gotten a little bit more controversial with some of the things that they do. They kind of come in and the board kind of influences programming a little bit stronger. That doesn't really happen. When it comes to the day-to-day operations of HMS, they really hire other people to kind of come in and do that. And the board wants to be informed of that. And that's why not just quarterly, but often I do update our board so they're aware of what's going on. But it's very different than a way a public school might operate. Again, the way budgets work, the single biggest meeting of the year that we have is coming up on June 11th with our board. And that's when the board basically will approve our 24-25 budget. And so myself and the VPs and staff members are having meetings. We've been having them since February, talking through where we think we're going to be. I'm sharing things like understanding what our state allotment looks like. We have a 4.65% increase coming from the state, which is a good thing. Although we do have to wait for the politicians in Harrisburg to pass that budget. That sometimes can be fun. And so making sure that we know that information, putting those numbers together and understanding what our needs are. All of the various department heads are coming to me and saying, here's where we are staffing wise, here's where we are enrollment wise, putting that number together in a budget that is presented to the board, and the board asks questions like, can we afford this? Is this appropriate? Before they would approve it. And they do that in June. Again, different process in a public school meeting where you're looking at really specific funding, where community members may have concerns about specific funding members. You have public hearings, you have public records, you have the Sunshine Act that looks at those things. Ours is very different in that particular way. And so that's the biggest thing that the board's going to do coming up is approving our budget. All right, so what type of things are board level decisions, things that the board really acts upon? So the big, large scale, big picture decisions, anything that's talking about the long-term health of HMS, the board's going to be part of those things. Things like the renovation that happened in Harris Hall, the board's part of that. Currently, the board's been looking at possible future renovations. We've made no decisions about that, but the board's been involved in the process of bringing in some different advisors to come in, make some suggestions about what changes may happen to the building. No decisions have been made about that, but those would be board level decisions because, again, all of those decisions, if you've heard, I think I've shared things going home about a renovation study and about an accessibility study, and just sort of the long-term things in the building, like new heating, new AC, there's some new security systems we're putting in place. All those things are super expensive. And so many of those things may require a capital campaign, a separate fundraising campaign that we would have to raise money for. The board makes that decision. The board will decide, yes, we think we need to raise X number of dollars to do some improvement to the building. That's a board level decision. And that's the next bullet is the capital campaign and endowment projects. Again, that's something like a renovation. Again, we're not currently undertaking any renovation. We've been studying it. We've been getting some pretty interesting numbers, which I've been sharing with the board. But it's going to be up to the board to decide if those things are going to move forward and just how much money the board thinks we can either raise or do a specific project for. The endowment campaign, what the endowment does is, again, the endowment is designed to make sure that HMS's long-term health is in good shape. So that's the purpose of an endowment. An endowment is money that you can draw upon if you have to, but the idea is that you don't, and you let an endowment grow just in case, if there's truly something catastrophic that would happen, you have plenty of money in the bank to make sure the organization continues. We're very fortunate that HMS's endowment has grown very nicely over the last 10 years. And all of the conversations we can have at the board level are talking about what the next generation looks like at HMS because of that endowment. and that's something the board manages. Like I said, annual budget approval, that's the most concrete thing that the board does. And again, what will happen is that, Jeff and I are working on that, along with talking with all the other department heads about putting that together. We'll put that together, we'll present to the board. The board will get to ask questions. And we won't have a budget for next year until the board has actually seen what Jeff and I are proposing for that to be, and that will happen in June. And again, big transitions is what the board's about. The board hired me in 2009. The board's looking in a transition process right now for my replacement. And the board also is something that is, they're constantly going out and advocating for the HMS community. The board is often involved in fundraising, basically raising the profile of HMS, which may lead to other opportunities, and being sort of a community representative out there to HMS is part of what they do. All right. Basically, the kind of things that does not go through the board. This is a chart. This is a screen I think is really helpful to have. I kind of hit this really quickly, but just kind of bring that point home. Is again, day-to-day upkeep. Board's not involved in that. Again, the board's coming in and meeting 4 times a year. They're certainly advised more often than not. I communicate with the board much more than just 4 times a year. But when they actually come and meet on things, they're not coming in and weighing in and telling us to cut the grass, or they're not telling us to fix the heat, or to get new windows when a window breaks. We have a wonderful staff. Paul Murray and his staff do a great job of doing those things. The board's not involved in those sort of day-to-day type of things. They also have a very limited role in hiring. Our current board has been involved in hiring 2 people at HMS, myself and Jeff, who's our VP of Finance. Everything else is responsible to various department heads to do that. So the board's not weighing in on who actually works here at HMS. The board also is not weighing in on curriculum and the specific programs and any sort of new ideas we may have for new therapeutic techniques. The board doesn't have a say in that, except the board, we're really lucky, are able to be advisors in those things because many of our board members have a very strong background in those areas, and they can make recommendations, and they can be, for me personally, they've been a wonderful sounding board about decisions. And I know I've made it really my practice to share decisions with the board to make sure they're aware of what's going on. When it comes to the day-to-day operations of things, they hire people that they oversee. They have to make sure people like me are doing a good job, but they're not involved in those day-to-day things. And they have no involvement whatsoever in the most important meetings that we have. And those are the IEP meetings and decisions that we make for each of the 62 students that are here. The board does not get involved in that at all. That's why we're really lucky to have Teresa Taco and her staff in place, or Boyd, who's on this call, and the therapist that she works with, Patty Mars, who is in charge of our student care department. They're the ones making the decisions about the curriculum, the treatment, therapies that all of our students receive. And our board, I can tell you, are our biggest cheerleaders for making sure that the quality of that remains really, really strong. Like I said, just mention all those people. So this graphic is great. This gives you a sense of what the structure looks like, of how it is. You can see the board right there, and Becky, they're at the top. And the person who directly reports, 2 people who directly answer to the board. First is myself, the person in the position of president, but also our medical director, Dr. Laura Owens, who was a protege of actually Dr. Bacharach, and she currently works at Nemours. She reports directly to the board. And you can see, look, following the lines there, then what happens from there? Everybody below that, our VP level, they're direct reports to me, but they're much better at what they do than I am. And we have a really, really strong team with Teresa in education, Laura in therapies, Patty in student care, Dee Blakeney in HR, which really all of the employees have a direct role with Dee. They actually, the team is separate from me in some ways, making sure our employees are being treated well, have all the things they need. And then Jeff, our VP of Finance and Operations, directly supervises facilities, food services, and both our assistive technology and our IT departments as well. So that's the structure of how it works. So the board basically really, like I said, directly oversees really 2 people. But again, I think it's a sign of a healthy organization that communication goes in both directions on this chart, so that our board is aware of things And they're very wonderful in the sense that they really trust the wonderful people that you see on that screen to make those decisions that most directly affect your children. Great. So again, just those big things of things of where the board really was involved. So again, biggest one in 2007 was the renovation capital campaign. That was the last capital campaign that we undertook, and that was basically transforming the building. If those of you who were not familiar with the building, the educational part of the building where the classrooms are, those were also dorm rooms at one point in time. And so when the residence was added in 2008, it really fundamentally changed the layout of the building. And that took a great deal of money to raise to do that. And that board took that on. The board does a lot of things around strategic planning. Again, think long-term when you think of the board. The board put in place a strategic plan in 2014 and 2017. That was part of the transition in 2019 when Diane Gallagher retired and I came on board. And we're currently in the process now of looking at strategic planning, for what the next 5, 10, next generation really looks like, which is what Becky and the board is looking at right now. So again, it's those long-term things that the board's looking at. Here we go. That's the end of my spiel. So I'm going to stop sharing now and come back and open it up for any questions that anybody has.
Hey, Tom. And I'm not Laura, I'm actually Ray, but she makes it all herself work. You've couched the conversation when it comes to the board within almost its current state. And so when it comes to probably this strategic plan, right? Where is the vision at, right? So meaning, the HMS was something else 100 years. When you say 5, 10, 15 years, where does just not the next gen come from, but new innovative ideas? So selfishly, right? Gloria doesn't say it's ready. We've had such a great relationship with HMS and moved here, as most of you are aware, for HMS. But as Jacob starts to transition, even like a day program. I think HMS, actually Overbrook School for the Blind too, has been so competent at what they do that people look towards you to how do we solve the next 60 years of Jacob, right?
How not to fall off the cliff.
Not falling off, right? Because the cliff has been around as long as probably HMS has. But talking about the vision side, right? The daring to dream for what HMS can be and actually could be. Does that make any sense, Tom?
That's a great question. And Becky, do you want me to take that, or do you want to?
Why don't you start?
Okay. Sure. So that basically that is the biggest question they for private school world, and I can share that from a broader perspective of what all of us and I've been fortunate enough, and this will continue. I've been part of the leadership of the Approved Private School Alliance. In these are the conversations that we're having about what transition looks like, and you may have noticed that we have taken a lot of steps to both invigorate, sort of transform really our transition program, in having a transition coordinator really for the first time, having a much stronger program than we had before, and starting to look at partnerships that we haven't undertaken before. It's really challenging. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver on this because it really is the #1 issue that's out there for all families, and we do know that. So when it comes to that visioning of that, it's hard to get specific on that when the time, I know the clock is ticking for a lot of you on the call wanting those answers about right now. That is a huge component of the strategic plan, is how can HMS change its mission? We're a little bit like an oil tanker that way, though, in the sense that change does take time. But I can tell you that conversation has been very rigorous about what the future can look like, because we know there's a need there. And that really has kind of informed. And again, it's hard to promise timing on this, so I just want to be honest about that. Is that looking at the renovation study, we do have capacity in the building for the building to look different. And so therefore, the question comes down to what's the right priority for that? And also then what's the capacity for HMS, which really, has not done a whole lot of fundraising when it comes to some of the larger organizations around us. To transform our building will be really expensive. To get more space to say have a day program or to have a program that's specifically for post 22, that's going to require a significant commitment on our part from a fundraising perspective. We don't have the space right now to do it. So that is part of the strategic planning process is, one, do we think we can do that? Do we think that's the right use of space? And then how do we find the resources to do that? And like I said, I don't know if that sums up some of the conversations we've had, Becky, or if you've got more to add to that.
I was just really going to echo what Tom just said. I like we have said, have been around HMS for a good number of years. And I can assure you that quite a lot of time has been dedicated to speaking about this very topic. It is very top of mind. Both, at HMS and sort of universally with this population. It's really, really, big, big topic. And, one of the most important and, somewhat frustrating things that I have learned in my time with HMS is really the exorbitant amount of time that is needed to make any big decision.
Well, if I can add to one of the things that kind of, I know it doesn't answer the question appropriately, but I know these are the questions that the board's been supportive in having, and the current leadership of HMS has, and something that I've kind of made a priority is that HMS has the ability to be a very strong advocate within the community because of the history that we've been, because of the reputation that we have. And again, it's not the short-term answer, I know that. The long-term answer, or at least the more reasonable answer to this, is to look at this from a funding perspective. And to basically be saying at the state level, which is really where these answers are going to come from, that we're very fortunate. I won't speak for Jeff, who's got to put these numbers together in the budget, and he's in the middle of doing that right now. But the funding that we get right now is appropriate because the law requires it. And so therefore we're able to provide the level of services we can provide till age 22. there is not the same law for post-22, and therefore there's not the same resources for that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've made a priority in the time that I've been here has been getting those people in the building to not only know who we are from that sense of what we're doing, they can take credit that we're doing a really good job for kids who are 22 and under, but to then be able to advocate. And every single one who comes in the building, it's great. They say, what do you need? I don't ask them for more money for post-22. I'm careful about that. I don't want them to give us less, or excuse me, pre-22. I tell them what the problem is. Problem is that we need to find this from not just from an HMS perspective, not just from the 32 per private school perspective, but from a state, from a national level.
Yeah.
Is that this is a national issue that all of you are directly dealing with. And I know you're dealing with it with really very, very real deadlines that are right there. And so that's one of the things that, again, it's not a promise of a program that's going to exist tomorrow, but it is a way to rally who we are and build upon what we are as part of the vision of what the future looks like. Is that, one of the kind of interesting things that was said about HMS was that we were the best kept secret in West Philadelphia. Well, part of that is to stop being that and to make sure people know who we are. And I think we have done a better job of that, of people knowing who we are. And I think that gives us a chance to be an advocate, not just for our students who are here, but for the entire network of families who need services that go beyond age 22.
And Tom, the question is more, and thank you both for answering, is it's more the vision, right? And, COVID, good or bad, right? We have seen things that we never thought would happen in Philadelphia, right? So you say University of Sciences, being acquired by St. Joe's, Cabrini, Villanova, Drexel, both Drexel grads that was 1/10 the size of what it is now. And what I saw in business, and I'm a business person, is all these new opportunities have come up. Even the business world, right, to acquire that, and it'd be good on an ongoing basis. Besides this education series, which has been awesome, thank you, is to understand of how you think about vision and where you're going. Because one of the things that all these families have, and I'm speaking on behalf of mine, is giving us hope, right? Because when we think of IBM is a totally different company today than what it was, right? And it's good to see that, it could be vertical, horizontal integration, what that could be. It might not be a day program. It might be the next thing in technology for this population or something else. So it's good to hear, but I think it'll also be good, besides the annual report, to talk about things, that you can talk about. And I know there's a slippery slope by giving hope. But the more you can talk about vision, the more I think the families can say, one, give money back, right? Because what's in it for us to give money back, right? And we would be glad to, because you have proven, HMS has proven competent with Laura and everybody else around the horn. So one, we thank you for being guests in your house, but two, we want to see HMS be that little secret that is talked about on every corner of this country, right? So thank you.
Sure, and I think I can just share with you what I've seen from Becky in the brief time that she's been board chair, is that she has made a priority of that. And I think that's probably where she was talking about time of that strategic planning process being one that continues. You saw that the 2017 was the last time there's a complete plan there. There is absolutely a really important role for families in that, to not only know what the plan is, but to contribute to it.
Yeah.
And we are in the process of putting that together, where we're going to be reaching out to people to get that input from all of you to kind of help create that vision.
Yeah.
And Tom, I volunteer right now for it. So.
Great.
Hey, Tom. Sorry.
So.
Tom.
Yes.
Hi, it's Marilyn.
Hi,
How are you?
Marilyn.
Sorry, when you asked me if I wanted to say anything before, I was on mute, I think, and I couldn't find how to unmute. So,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So just to give a little perspective, we've been part of HMS for a long, long time, as students, family members, and the topic that we're talking about has been raised for years. And one thing that I want to point out is that it's a totally different licensure. It's a totally different funding source. HMS school is funded by the Department of Education, right? Am I saying the truth there, Tom?
Yes, you are.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. Post 22, the Department of Education is not involved. It's the Department of Human Services, Department of Public Welfare, Medicaid. It's all those things. That's not an maneuverable roadblock, but it's big. And so I think, and I think we talked about this at one of the last parent meetings, because everybody's worried about it. We're in the process right now of trying to figure out kind of long-term planning for our daughter.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple different avenues to go. If it's not something that's built in our house, but we build stronger relationships with people who already have that licensure and already have established relationships in that funding source, that could be just as satisfying. Right now there's just such a limited number of choices of what to do and where to go.
Yeah.
That's very well said. One of the things that I think we need to, HMS could play a big part in is influencing, policymakers
Yeah.
to understand that there needs to be a carve out for people with that are living life with the type of disabilities we're talking about. And a lot of the programming that's out there now just doesn't really play in the same sandbox that our kids are in. And it's very frustrating when you try to find services that fit our population, because people just, right now they don't have the staffing for it. They don't have, if they could staff up, they would still struggle with a lot of the ins and outs of how to properly manage the care and handle, making finding a fit in terms of programming for one of our loved ones. So there's a lot to it, and having HMS advocate with policymakers and legislatures and the governor and everybody along the way is I think should be a priority of the board. Wielding the influence that some of the people that are on that board probably already have could go a long way to making something like that go.
I love what you're saying. I want to build just one thing on what you're saying. Wouldn't it be interesting to put on our to-do list, Christine, maybe, is a night with legislators, a parents' night with legislators, and bring in a panel of legislators and just let people air their priorities.
Mm-hmm.
That would be kind of awesome, I think.
Yeah, you kind of make it, you would make it regional as opposed to, just in Philadelphia, because you hold the legislators that are involved in all of our kids' lives.
Right. Look at the population and the stakeholder regions. Yeah.
Well, there's also, when you think about it, and Tom, just to get your thoughts, and Becky's on this, is that a bucket that's missing off of your recruitment? Because every board I know, privately or public-private, whatever you call it, is the whole lobbyist arm, right?
Yeah.
When you think about what Marilyn was saying, it's not even the legislature; it's the people that the lobbyists go after, right? Who is ever on that committee that manages Medicaid or stuff, right?
Yeah.
But maybe you want to, again, just from strategic planning standpoint, is open that up, because we know lobbyists are expensive, but if they have a tie to the heartstrings, right? Especially with Governor Governor Shapiro and others, and even I always screw up his last name, the one that's in charge of Special Olympics driver, right? It's just maybe that's part of the board of how do you attack them, right? In a positive way, right? Because you're right, the money, I'll tell you, it's either you pay me now or pay me later. And America has this reactive way to healthcare, right? If you pay me to exercise versus pay me to not smoke, right? One's reactive, one is proactive. And I think that might be an area, again, if you want our services, right, and for free, right, to actually talk about that, right? But I think it's valuable, Marilyn, but I just want to make sure that we're very targeted with this, right, overall.
That's a very good point. And I think
Yeah,
Pennsylvania
yeah.
is unique in that way, in that we are fortunate in that part of the Approved Private School Alliance that we're part of is really the reason why we're part of that. Actually, the dues we pay for that is to pay for a lobbyist.
Yeah.
So there is a lobbyist that does, advocate for the 32 schools in general.
Yeah.
And we've been, I think that's, that was part of my background and interest that I had that I thought was something that we should bring to it. That we're in a pretty good place to, like Marilyn's idea. That's a great idea, Marilyn. We have the contacts to put that invitation out there to do something like that.
Yeah.
But the key part for the lobbyist though is that and this is just specific to PA, is that we have roughly with the 62 kids that we have, I think it's something in the neighborhood of 70 different representatives who represent somebody, whether they're senator or representative in our school. There's probably about 2 of them that matter in Pennsylvania. Just the way the Pennsylvania government works. And so that's really where I think it's a great idea. We should have people come in, but you're going to have a lot of people like Rick Krajewski, who's in his 2nd term. He's our rep who represents us right there in West Philly. Super well-meaning guy. Doesn't have any influence in Harrisburg, except he can get us things like RACP grants and things like that whenever we decide to renovate the building. Just got $75,000 for security, which was wonderful. But having that lobbyist knowledge, which we do have, can kind of tell us who the committee chairs are and who the finance chair are. There's really, a small number of people in PA who really are those sort of policy experts that really kind of, that make legislation move. So I think it's all of this it's a kitchen sink approach to really making that advocacy. And I think there's a role for families to play in that because you've got the direct experience in it.
Are you partnered up with anybody from the ARC or folks of that nature that have other stakeholders in adult services that would be able to maybe provide some guidance there or share some wisdom?
We've got some really exciting, again, and I always want to be careful about over promising for anything like this, but I know that the work that Laura's been doing with CHOP in looking at an adult program, that for the first time we have the Office of OVR coming into the building with a number of our students. That's something that's really happened within the last year that's there. And so that really is individual advocacy from a retiring social worker who's just a houseifier at CHOP, who's reached out to us and made that connection. So yeah, but we do have those connections and looking for those things. And I think it's a question of, goes back to the first question about strategic planning, about what the vision is some of those things that we are in a process now of kind of needing to focus in on which of those things we're going to do, because it then goes back to what we can figure out both from a space perspective, from a resource perspective, and from all of the things that go into, again, not losing the board does a really good job of this too. Marilyn's a big part of this, is that asking questions about, well, what is happening for the day-to-day right now, and making sure that the resources are still being properly applied to make sure that the program remains as strong as it is for the kids who are 22 and younger. And then how do you find the mission, the time, the resources to then expand from that? And I think we are looking into how to do that, but then it's a question of balance of how do you keep doing what we're doing and then be able to grow at the same time. So I do think that those relationships are there. We can do more with them and grow them. And I think that we've got a really good growth mindset around that, in looking of knowing, again, there's no secret to what the challenge is at 22 and beyond. We all know that. So I think that is something that is definitely discussed as being part of what the future looks like, and looking how to make sure we've got the relationships to make those things happen.
For sure.
Yeah, Becky, one question I have to ask is, has HMS always had such a big commitment to the arts, the performing arts and such, or has that grown since you've been involved? Because I can't say enough about how much that works to broaden the horizons of our students. It really resonates in a lot of things that my daughter likes to do, and I see it in the faces of all the other kids when they're performing. It's a big part of what HMS has to offer.
Well, perfect question for me. I am fortunate to be able to share that the real impetus for the theater and creative arts program was started by a former employee who I know that a few of you are familiar with Rich Magnuson, who retired, I guess it was 10 years ago, but he was a long time beloved recreational therapist and nurse at HMS who really was a gifted practitioner, and I became friends with him actually when his daughter coincidentally answered my ad for care. This is now pushing 20 years ago. And this is a true story. You can't make it up. But Rich Magnuson really was pivotal in seeing the real gift that theater would be for these students. And the program has really expanded. And I know that Tom has kind of a special connection with Rich. Tom, I believe, was the first teaching artist from the Walnut Street Theater that Rich brought in to meet and teach a small group of HMS students, and it's grown from there. Right, Tom?
Yeah, if I could, I mean, I think really the real commitment goes back to really to Diane Gallagher for what she created here. In a sense that with the amazing work that ACO did for so many years that really inculcated art to the programming. Rachel Federman Morales coming in as a dance movement therapist. HMS was ahead of the curve with having Rachel, who's been there now almost 20 years. And then the cooperation, the production that we did at the other side of the fence was something that was going on for a long time. So it's really it's something that it's again, I think we can do a better job of telling our story in that way. And there's a huge commitment and story that's really powerful about the arts that has been something that we're really lucky about. We see it for kids now, but it really is. It's when I came to HMS as a stranger to the school over 20 years ago, I was blown away then by seeing the commitment that was there. And that's still unique. If you look at the approved private school world, is that's not part of IEPs in other places to talk about recreational arts and the places where we do that. And so that's something that I think Diane created the atmosphere that allow all of those wonderful people to really kind of work with kids, which they've been doing now for a generation, really is where that started. And now it's second nature that we make sure that the work that Paige does in the classroom from an art perspective is really beautiful and tied into our education system really well. And having Holly as a theater specialist now and having danced and Brad with music, it's really something that it's the all of that emanates from really what Diane created over 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's impressive stuff. And you raise a good point, in other school settings, a parent has to bang their head against the wall to advocate for extracurricular activities to be built into their kids' IEP as a, to support them with those efforts, right? A lot of parents don't even know that they have the capacity to ask for that, and at HMS is just you guys make it happen. It's awesome. I can't say enough about it.
Yeah.
Julie and Tracy, you cut us off. How does this work?
If there's no other questions, we will wrap up and make sure we send out the recording to everyone. Does anyone else have any other questions before we wrap up? Tom and Becky, thank you so much for your time, and Marilyn, and everyone who signed on. We really appreciate it. This is really lovely and informative.
You are very welcome.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, have a good night, everybody.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.